Hello, welcome to Converging Dialogues. This is Xavier Bonilla. On this episode, I have Manon Van Scheppingen. She is absolutely going to kill me for butchering her name once again. I apologize in advance. She is from the Netherlands. She has a PhD in developmental psychology from Tilburg University. And she's an assistant professor at Tilburg University, where she teaches a variety of courses. What caught my attention with her was a series of papers that she's written over the past couple years on self-esteem, life satisfaction, parenthood, and divorce. And so she does a lot of these big life events throughout the developmental span. And I wanted to really get into some of the weeds of some of the current literature on this stuff. And so she was kind enough to come on and really give me some of her brain power for 2+ hours, and we had a fantastic conversation. We started the conversation with kind of an overview of life transitions and young adulthood and what some of those transitions are, such as in a shared and non-shared environment. We talk about personality and how we define personality and how various life transitions could possibly change personality. So we try to give a broad overview of just kind of your lifespan development and all the major transitions. And then we jump into one of her first big papers on self-esteem and motherhood. So we give a kind of overview of that. We talk about the upward and downward declines of self-esteem and life satisfaction, and then how this works for second and third and fourth pregnancies. We talk about some of the critiques of the methods for this paper, and she gives a really nice explanation of structural equational modeling and piecewise analyses, which are some statistical analyses in what she used for this paper. We talk about some of the results and conclusions of this paper. And then we talk about her next big paper about divorce and what the life satisfaction looks like post-divorce. We give some of the theoretical background, such as the hedonic adaptation set point theory, among others. We talk about the kind of counterfactual elements and how she built the study with her co-investigators. And we talked about the three main questions or hypotheses of the study. We talk about the pre, during, and post-divorce stages and what the trajectory for satisfaction for individuals is post-divorce. And then we look at the results and what the differences were at the mean level and then at the individual level, and what life satisfaction can look like post-divorce. We also briefly touched on some of the practical implications of these studies and some of her future work. She was absolutely lovely to have on. She's quite brilliant. Really good researcher, and I really just had a lot of fun getting in the weeds, getting into the details, talking about some stats, talking about methods and all sorts of stuff. And so I really enjoyed this conversation, and now I bring you Manon Van Scheppingen. I am here with Manon Van Scheppingen. I know I totally messed that up. Sorry about that. I'm so sorry. I'm very pleased to have you on my podcast. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. I also very much like the long formats you're doing. It's great. And so I'm really looking forward to talking about my research.
Yes, thanks. I feel I've asked around a little bit. I feel some people like it, but maybe some people don't, but I don't really care. I think most people like it. I like long form on most things, so especially conversations. I like to get as much details and allow people to get the best version of themselves and talk about their research and talk about themselves. And so, okay, so tell listeners where you're from and what your research is in, and what your degrees and education and all that good stuff. Just tell us just a little bit about yourself and what you're currently doing.
Sure. Yes. Yeah. So as most of you might already hear, I'm not from the US. So I have a Dutch accent. So I'm from the Netherlands. And I'm an assistant professor at developmental psychology at Tilburg University. And my main interest is in personality psychology, so and especially personality change. So that's my topic. So I did my PhD also at Tilburg University, and my dissertation was about life transitions, and especially the transition to parenthood and how people change in their personalities when they become a parent. And after that, I did a postdoc at the University of Amsterdam in sociology, actually. So I just took a trip outside of my field to just broaden my horizon a bit. And there I also studied divorce and life satisfaction. So that's what I did in Amsterdam. And then I came back to Tilburg University. So it's clear that I like it a lot there. It's a very nice department. I also teach there. So my contract is 50% teaching and 50% research. So I teach first year psychology students, personality psychology. So it's great that I can teach something that's close to my heart. So I also really enjoy that. Yeah, that's in short my background.
How did you, sometimes people have different ways of getting involved in their various interests. How did you get involved in kind of life transitions and life events initially, and then obviously looking at divorce? Is it just that was who was doing the research, and you were then you picked the dissertation and that was it, or was there some kind of particular passion or reason for doing it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's something that's, I always like when people have this story where they say, yeah, already when I was young or when I started studying, I already knew exactly what I wanted to do, but it was not the case for me. So I thought I wanted to work in practice as you are doing. And I wanted to work with children or adolescents. And, but when I was studying, I kind of noticed that I liked doing research a lot, and I liked statistics, and it was kind of different than the other students that really wanted to work in practice. And I think the story of why I chose this topic actually starts with my advisor, Wiebke Blijdorn, and she did research on actually a lot of twin studies as well. When she was younger. So that's how she started her research. And then she found out that personality is partly genetic and partly caused by the environment. So it's kind of 50-50 if you look at these twin studies. And also that people change a lot. So we found that a lot of studies now show that people can and do change across the entire lifespan. So they, for example, in young adulthood, then people become more emotionally stable. They also become more self-controlled, so they increase in conscientiousness. And they also, to some extent, become a little bit more agreeable. And so they become more mature. That's actually what happens. And the big question then is, why does this happen? And that's something that's combined with the fact that we know that the environment also plays a role from these twin studies. So that we know that also a big part of it is caused by our environment. That kind of triggered my research. So I kind of built on these studies from my advisor, these twin studies, by looking at these 50% from the environment. What are the key factors that contribute to change in personality? And not only the big 5 personality traits, so the ones I now mentioned, like emotional stability and also agreeableness, conscientiousness, and you also have openness and extroversion, of course. So these are the big 5, but also I look a bit broader at self-esteem, self-control, life satisfaction, which are to some extent also part of our personalities, I think. I really wanted to look for these main factors to answer this big question: why do people change in their personalities when they're already grown up, and why does this happen? Yeah, I thought it was just a very interesting question.
It is an interesting question, mostly because I think in general it's very interesting, and there's a lot of, I think, dissonance about what is and what is not true about that. I'll just say, for me personally, I'm somewhat agnostic about how much does our personality change. So maybe we can we can fight about that a little bit.
Yes, yeah, of course. Yeah, I always love to hear people.
Yeah.
Like it's a very interesting, discussion already. Yeah.
I'll be very curious to get into that. Okay, so maybe what you can do is you sort of already started to do this, but maybe for listeners, kind of give us a primer of recap of various life transitions and life events in general, right? How does that work over development? From you can start from birth, loosely, and then, but you can focus on adulthood and what that looks like, because most people might have, if people have taken a intro to psych, course or something in undergrad or AP psychology in high school, they might have some idea of developmental stages. So, but maybe as we get past adolescence and just looking at various life transitions and life events, maybe just kind of give us an overview, and then we can talk about one of your big papers.
Yes, yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, I think that, I will maybe start in young adulthood because my research focuses on that.
Sure.
So I'm not really focused on transitions before that, although a lot happens, of course, before that. I think I really focus mostly on normative life transitions. So that means things that happen to a lot of people and that are also usually pretty big, like starting a first-time job, or starting your first long-term relationship, moving in together, or getting married or getting divorced. That's also one that might be, not a normative is also a difficult word always. I'm not really sure that's a normative one, but it's something that also happens to a lot of people.
Yes. I know for in the United States, divorce kind of sort of fluctuates between high 40s to low 50s in terms of percentages. So somebody gets married, there's a 48 to 52% chance that they're going to get divorced. I can't remember the numbers at the top of my head. I had a conversation with Nicholas Wolfinger, who a sociologist that studies all this stuff, and we talked about this, and I cannot remember off the top of my head. I think it's a little bit lower now. Maybe it's like 48 or 45%, but that's how it is here in the United States. How is it? I don't know what data sets you're pulling from, if it's just from the Netherlands or from other countries in Western Europe, but what is it, I guess, in your way in terms of the average divorce rate, I guess?
Yeah, I think it's also similar. The number that came to mind for me was, I think, 40%. Okay. And the study that you wanted to talk about today is from Germany, actually. So there, I think it was around 40% of the people that get divorced. Yeah.
So I only bring that up because that would seem, I guess, somewhat normative, right? Unless you're taking normative as like 2/3, right? 66%, kind of.
Yes.
But it definitely happens very often, right? Everyone knows someone that's been that's been through a divorce, or a family member or a friend or something. I guess you could say it's normative and life change.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, what you said. So first job, first relationship, moving in, getting married, divorce, children, first and subsequent children. Are there any other normative life transitions or events that happen for adults?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I mean, it's, these are, I think, the ones that I focused on the most, because I mostly focused on young adulthood, where you start these new roles. So really starting new roles, and also, divorce is kind of an exception, because it's about the loss of a role, of the role as a marital partner. But I also hope in the future to focus more on older age, and then you can think of retirement and becoming a grandparent, which I think is also very interesting, and also the combination of that. So just if you are retired, you also lose a role, and it might be that becoming a grandparent then might fill that gap somehow, that you then still feel the purpose of this new role and to fulfill that role. So that's something I also want to focus more on in the future.
There's a good book. You may have heard of this. There's a book called The Soft Moon Rises, I believe is the title. And it kind of details, it's a history an explanation of menopause, and it's a fascinating book. And there's a long chapter in there, and it's referenced throughout the book on the grandmother hypothesis, right? That for women, they will have, after they have gone through menopause, that there's a type of social role that becomes important for older women in, different types of, historically tribes or with certain groups, and even still today, about the role of what a grandmother does and what she does for her grandchildren and things like that. It's a kind of a long-standing hypothesis. So there's some very interesting ideas about geriatric population as well in terms of life transitions.
Yeah, I think it's a super fascinating topic. I hope to do more on it in the future. I think that's with personality change and things like grandparenthood, that's something that's not been studied that much yet. So that's something I would like to do in the future as well.
So we have all these life transitions in life events, and you're saying that, or studying that there is changes in personality through time. So you're focusing now on young adulthood, right? So if we backtrack a little bit, so if we come to puberty, right? 12, 13, right? Different for boys and girls, and we go through adolescence, and then young adulthood starts when for you? 19, 20, 21, or is it as young as 17?
Yes. Yeah. That's usually where it's kind of starts. Yeah. I don't really have like a clear year or something, but usually I start around that age with my studies. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And how do you understand, I guess, personality up to this point, right? You see personality as predominantly fixed, or that it's still evolving and growing? Is there, talk about the interaction between, kind of the genetic predispositions or inheritance, and then some of the environmental factors, such as these life events. Talk a little bit about the personality aspects of what are we coming to when we get to 1920, and then subsequently what kind of starts to change and evolve based on as the brain develops, but then also as you have different experiences in the environment.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a little bit outside of my research, that I don't really focus on what happens before, but it's very important to have that as a basis, of course.
Sure.
What I already said, what we know from twin studies, I think there are some limitations to these studies, but it's nice to get this broad estimates from it. What is the role of genes and of the environment? And what I really like is that these studies do show that the genes play a large role. So also for the way how we develop our personalities in childhood and adolescence, but also the environment, and especially the non-shared environment plays a role. And that's interesting and also puzzling to me. Why that's, because most people think how you are raised might have, so that's the shared environment. So what you shared with your brothers and sisters, that might play a large role for your personality. But this is something that does not come from research. So we find that from the environmental factors based on these twin studies, that it's especially the non-shared environments that explains why we become the way we are in terms of our big 5 personality traits.
Could you give an example of non-shared environment?
Yes, yeah, of course. Yeah, so that's one thing that comes to mind first is maybe like the peers you have in adolescence. That and I can see that is very important for shaping your personality. So just the peer group becomes very important in adolescence, and that's something that might also shape who you are as a person. However, it's not only that; it's also things still in how you are raised by your parents, but is more about how they treat you in a unique way and the interaction with your personality. So I think that's it's very simple to say, like, the non-shared environments is something that's what I want to say about with the shared environment, it seems very counterintuitive that it's not about that, but about the non-shared environment. But how you're raised and how your parents respond to you is very different than how they do that to your brother or sister, I think. So that's something that also plays a role there. So that's also part of the non-shared environment, something you don't share with your brother and sister. If you are, for example, more you have a very sociable personality, your parents respond to you in a different way than if you don't have that. So if your brother or sister might be a little bit more shy or introverted. And that interaction is also captured in that non-shared environment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that seems intuitively right. I think anybody that's grown up with siblings will know, like, yeah, I was treated differently than my siblings were. They got everything, handed to them. I was, more strict or whatever. And so it sounds like there's these individual differences. That's not the right way to say it. Not individual differences, but how each sibling is treated from the parents or primary caregiver is unique, right? There's cohabitating and living together. But if you talk to any sibling, you get them, if you get together and you have, 3 or 4 siblings and they talk about the same event, they're going to talk about it in 3 or 4 different ways, right? They have different ways of interacting with it. So you're saying that in young adulthood, the non-shared environment, so namely peer groups, has an impact on your continuing development. Yes?
Yes. Yeah.
And, typically, how do we understand what, how young adults, so this 1920, I guess all the way through young adulthood goes till middle adulthood, which would be 40 something, right? Is it late 30s?
Yes. 30s, yeah.
40s, something like that. Mm-hmm. So all through your 20s, most of your 30s, how do we understand what this looks like? These peer developments, obviously peers are going to be different in adolescence or childhood, but what's the role, I guess, or function of one aspect of a non-shared environment, such as peer involvement for a developing personality for someone?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. So I also didn't study this myself. So, and I think it's also part of this puzzle that we have not really identified like the key factors that shape our personalities. So I think that it's hard for me to pinpoint. I think there are some studies that show that you select peers that might be a bit similar to you in terms of personality traits, and then you also co-develop, so you might also become more similar over time. But the results are very mixed. So I'm not sure if I can give like a very clear answer here.
That's okay. That's okay.
It's such a mixed. We have so many results that that contradict each other sometimes, and so that's difficult to give one answer to. Yeah.
So I guess to finish up the overview of this, what are to set up for the big papers that you've written? Is there anything else in the overview that you want to say about these transitions and influence on personality in young adulthood before we launch into some of the specifics?
Yeah, maybe it might be good to at least theoretically go into why we would change. Sure. The theory behind it. So there's, for example, one that might be good to mention is the social investment principle. That's one of the theories that kind of lays the groundwork for why and how we think it happens that people change if they enter a new role. So maybe I can take Parenthood as an example, because that's one that I studied a lot. Okay. How that works is that so you become a parent, and then you have your first child, and then this role comes with many challenges, and also with role expectations from society, for example. The idea was that it would force you to have to behave in a more mature way, that you have more responsibility, and you have to really change your daily behavior. So you have to take care of a child. The idea is that first leads to changes in states so that you show different behavioral patterns just on a daily level. And if you would do that for a longer time, so you invest in that role and you commit to it, and that's something with parenthood, of course, that's a very clear example because you cannot, that's something that's irreversible and leads to long-term changes. Mm-hmm. And if you do that for a long time, that might eventually in the long run lead to personality change. So that if you change your states, your behaviors, your thoughts, your feelings for a long time, then they might become relatively stable and become part of who you are, also part of your self-concept, of your identity and your personality. So that's the theory behind why we might expect personality to change in the long run after a role transition.
That overview is very helpful. I guess I'm puzzled a little bit on how is personality changing. So you're talking about some sense of maturity, right? You have a child in young adulthood, right?
Yes.
You're 23, you have a kid and you have to change everything, right? You have to change, you can't, stay out late going to clubs and bars and doing all that stuff, right? You can, but you're responsible for your offspring. How you can't just go buy something, right? You have to be worried about, your finances and taking care of your child, all these things. So there are certainly behavioral changes.
Yes,
absolutely. There's economic changes. There are many of those changes, but how do we understand how this scales down to personality? Because while I don't think personality is static, I think that much of your core personality is pretty firmly set. Even if you look at some of the longitudinal data and studies that have been done on the Big Five, there is some change and shift with certain of the traits where I think it's openness to experience and maybe conscientiousness, but it's not so big of a change over time, at least to my knowledge. And so how do we understand how that does or doesn't change based on when you become a parent?
Yeah, well, you said already some interesting things. So I think that one thing that comes to mind is that first, maybe it's good to say what personality is, because so that's like the definition I use.
Yes, we should define our terms. Yes. Yes.
Let's just start with that. It's I think how I see it is that these are relatively stable. So relatively is already an important word. Relatively stable patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving. So that's how I see it. Mm-hmm. So in that definition, I don't really make any assumptions on if this is like something that is completely genetic or if it's also environmental. I think both play a role. And it's I think that's also why what I said, that I don't only look at the Big Five, but also life satisfaction, self-esteem. As long as something is relatively stable and part of your thoughts, your behaviors or your feelings, I think it can be called personality. So that's something, I have a very broad view of that. And I also do think that, it's in the definition that it's relatively stable, right? So what you're saying is true. It's not that we expect you to have a different personality from one week to the next. That would not happen. Right. But also there are some studies that do point to relatively quick personality change that can happen. So there's a review from Brent Roberts in which he looks at interventions and personality change. And there are some interventions that don't really focus on wanting to change your personality, but are more like cognitive behavioral therapy or even taking some kind of medication. There are different types of that's all part of interventions in his review. And there he showed that there are changes, especially in neuroticism, which is most strongly linked to disorders and depression, anxiety. And that even across a couple of, I think there were interventions that worked maybe like for the time span was like 6 months or sometimes 6 weeks or a bit longer. And then you already see changes in neuroticism that are as big as the changes we see across many, many years in these longitudinal studies. So that it seems to be that even in the short term, there might be changes in the personality. But I also share your skepticism because this is, of course, usually self-report. And it's also difficult to say, when do we really say that somebody changes in their personality? So I'm still, I'm not really sure. I mean, it's good to also have then other reports to kind of compare it to and measure people also 10 years later to see if the changes are really enduring. So it keeps being a very, very difficult question to answer if change really happens.
Yeah, I think it's hard because, okay, I'll use myself as an example here, right? Like who I am, many of my, think about certain core traits, right? You know, if I'm very passionate, or if I'm very stubborn, or if I'm very patient, or if I'm, you know, whatever these temperamental kinds of ways of being, those things are pretty constant throughout my life, right? You know, who I was at 6 and who I was at 16 and 26 and 36, I'm getting very old, all these things, right? All of these, I can have many things that happen, right? You know, I'm married, I have a child, I, finished my, my education, certain job, all these things, right? But there's something in the core that stays the same throughout. That's what it is to be me, right? Which
yes.
I would encapsulate that in personality, because there's going to be other things that are going to change, right? Behaviors, beliefs, ideas, maybe even approaches, which you kind of associate with behavior. But that doesn't mean that the core personality of who I am changes, or what it means to be me. That's not to say that there aren't maybe branches on the tree of personality that can change and evolve and develop more, right? But I guess my way of asking this is, how much do those life events, specifically, like having a first child in young adulthood, it will obviously create many changes, but how do we know, or how do we understand that it changes, I guess what I would say is core personality, or how much does it influence core personality of what it means to be you?
Yes.
Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. I mean, it's something that I'm always struggling with and thinking about, and how to what is core personality? How would you put that in a questionnaire? Like, that's also very difficult, of course. But I think it could still be that you become a little bit less neurotic. It's not like you become a completely different person, but you can still gradually develop. So that's more how I would see it. But also what you're saying is actually more in line with the findings. So I think the findings would agree with you, because it's what we find is that especially for Parenthood, that people don't really change in these core aspects if you would measure them as the big 5 personality traits. So these my studies have found that people don't really show large changes in these big 5 traits if they become a parent. But they do show more short-term changes in self-control, in self-esteem. So if you look more at the more specific facets of personality, so you have these big 5 traits, but you could also look at more facets that are less broad, so they are more closer to behavior, then you can maybe see larger changes. And also self-esteem is something that's a little bit less stable than the big 5 traits, and that also shows larger fluctuations. The same is for life satisfaction. So I always think about these things at different levels of stability. So the big 5, I think, might be most stable, and self-esteem and life satisfaction, for example, are less stable. So also more affected by life transitions. Yeah, so I think that's actually in line with what you're saying. So it seems to be the results are in line with that. That the core personality seems to be more stable, and things that are more on the surface or more close to behavior, they change more. Yes.
I think yes, because obviously you want to have, Big Five is great. It's very stable. It's stable over time and cross culturally. But as you're pointing out, it is not the only way in which we've categorized aspects of personality. And I think self-esteem and life satisfaction are also there, but I think statistically maybe less reliable, or there's more fluctuation there than with the Big Five, but still important to examine. But this is interesting though. These conversations I think are super interesting about personality, but then also the different things that happen to us and how they are impacting who we are, right? Again, like we said, they may impact. Yes, I mean, if you, most people don't want to be high on neuroticism, right? You don't want to be low on it either per se, but you want some kind of balance. And if someone is high on neuroticism and you can, alter that a little bit to have more balance, that would probably be a net positive, right? But I think it's interesting to see which ways it's impacting. Okay, so let's talk about the paper on motherhood. So we've kind of been talking about this already, but
that's true. Yeah, that is a good first paper to talk about now.
It's a good segue. Unless there was anything else you wanted to say about what we were just discussing.
No, I think we covered.
Okay.
Also it's good that we covered the definition and how we think about this, and I think it's good.
So with this paper, it was really good. I really enjoyed it. You were looking at self-esteem and relationships, right, in the transition to parenthood.
Yes.
Right. So basically, what does it look like when two partners become parents, right? And how does it influence and change their relationship, right? Because then now I can't remember exactly if it's in the paper, but because now you're not just partners, now you're parents or caregivers or providers. So there's a simultaneous change that's happening for two people, but becomes a collective kind of transition as well. So there's a bunch of things happening. So maybe I've kind of given you the layup here. So kind of fill us in on the motivation for the study and what you hypotheses were and what you were trying to find here.
Yeah. So this is what you're saying is already interesting. And one unfortunate thing is that this study was only on mothers, so we didn't have the fathers' reports, but still the mothers reported on their relationship satisfaction, so it was still about their relationship. So what was very nice of this study is what I usually actually do is not do my own data collection, but I use very big panel studies that are already out there and are sometimes not even used. So it's such a waste of data if people don't look at these all the outcomes that are measured in that study. So this was one of these studies where that was the case.
This must be your experience hanging out with the sociologists. They do this a lot. They like the big data sets, the big census data sets.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's true. And but also before that, I already did that. So I think that was also why I really found I felt welcome at sociology, because we had a similar approach already. But so this was a very big Norwegian data set. So more than 80,000 Norwegian mothers, huge. I'm not sure how the Norwegians did it, but they just collected so many reports from these mothers. I think they just asked every mother in Norway to participate in the study.
So 80,000 is a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. So that was just like data. And I think they usually used it for other outcomes, more economic outcomes. But they also measured self-esteem and relationship satisfaction. And therefore I thought this is great to look into, to really study how these mothers change during the transition to motherhood. yeah, so it was already like I wanted to study parenthood for my dissertation, and then this data set we found this, or my advisor Wiebke, she found it, and so that's actually how it started. And also that self-esteem and relationship satisfaction are very interesting to study together, because theoretically they're also linked to each other. So yeah, for example, you have social meter theory, and yeah, that's a theory that says that self-esteem is kind of a monitor of social inclusion. So if you're doing well in your romantic relationship, this might also have a positive effect on your self-esteem. It could also be the other way around, that self-esteem affects your relationship. So that's kind of a theory called dynamic interactionism, that it works both ways. So
right. If it's in a negative, then you would not feel, you would have negative self-esteem. So if you have a negative interaction with your partner, then you would have negative so both positive and negative.
Yes, yeah. So they are, theoretically linked, and we would expect them both to maybe change during the transition to motherhood. So there are already a lot of studies on relationship satisfaction and the transition to parenthood. That was kind of more maybe a replication in this data set to show that, the findings are a bit negative, I must say. So they find usually that people decline in relationship satisfaction, that they are less happy in their relationship, especially mothers. So mothers show the most strong decline, especially in the first year of parenthood, in relationship satisfaction. And for self-esteem, there were not a lot of studies. So our question was also to see if the similar things happen for self-esteem, or maybe self-esteem shows a very different pattern, and how also if they co-develop. What I was saying, that they might influence each other over time. And the nice thing also about this data set is that it's not only first-time mothers, but also mothers that are pregnant for the second time, or even the third time, or a later child. So this was interesting to compare, because for some studies on relationship satisfaction already showed that the first child might have the biggest impact. So it, of course, is the biggest change in your life, that you go from having no children to having a child, and therefore it might impact your relationship the most. That's also what you were saying, that you then become parents. First you are only partners, and then you change that role. So that's that might bring the most challenges for your romantic relationship. And therefore, we expect the largest dip after the first child. And for self-esteem, something similar might happen, that the biggest impact is after the first child. We didn't really know. So we just wanted to see if a similar pattern of change across time might happen for self-esteem as compared to relationship satisfaction.
It's just so interesting, and I think it's important, because I think there's a lot of these things happen, and a lot of people aren't asking these questions or looking at this type of content. So it's very fascinating for me as well. You're saying that after the first, let me get this right, the first year of having the first child, relationship satisfaction goes down.
In the first year. So
in the first year.
Yes, especially in the first year. So also after, so in this study, they had a measurement occasion at 6 months. So when a child was 6 months old, and then you see a dip in relationship satisfaction. Yeah.
Now, I can't remember if this is the case but well, let me ask you generally before I start imposing. Why? Any ideas as to why that could be? Right?
It's a good question. Yeah.
Any idea why?
I think there are several studies that also looked at why. So they just looked at predictors of this change. And some shows that it has something to do with the role division between, these are usually heterosexual couples that are followed, and that becomes more traditional, that women take care of the child more, and also are mostly working part-time, and that might cause, especially in this women's unhappiness with their relationship, that they didn't expect that beforehand. So they also linked it to expectations beforehand, that they then said like, oh yeah, it will be 50-50 how we divide the roles. And then afterwards, it doesn't really seem the case. So some studies point to that. And I think it's also, I mean, it makes sense that it has a big impact on the mother, especially because, of course, also breastfeeding and all the first, the physical, that you have to recover physically as well after childbirth. I mean, these are things that also play a role there, I think.
Certainly.
Yeah. So it might make sense that they decline more. And also, I think one nuance that we could add to this is that usually couples that decide to have a baby together, so usually in the studies, these were planned pregnancies. And then it's also the case that there are before birth of the child, they are very high on relationship satisfaction. So it might not be that strange that you decline a little bit, that it's kind of before you have a baby, you're maybe a bit in the honeymoon phase and you just are very happy. So it's not that they decline and are even lower than the population, the general population, if you look at averages. So that's just a nuance I want to add to it. So it's not maybe that drastic. And there are also a lot of individual differences here. So some studies also have looked into different subgroups of change. And then you see some people many people are just very stable or even increase. And just a smaller subgroup shows these more steeper declines in relationship satisfaction. So yeah, there are a lot of differences there.
My where I went with it is kind of like there's almost like it's like a container of sorts in my mind of there's a certain amount of I guess you could say emotional or psychological bandwidth, right? This is my guess here. If I think what you're saying is right, if you have high satisfaction with your partner before you're pregnant, and then it goes down before you're pregnant, is it just a shifting? Well, now I have a child I have to invest in. This child is giving me lots of satisfaction, right? I mean, not just that, I'm sure, right? There's a lot of other, suffering and pain that goes with it physically and everything else for first-time mothers. But that it's a bandwidth thing. Like I only have so much, and I don't have, on top of all of the role distribution that you discussed, that it becomes potentially lower satisfaction with the relationship because there's a shift in the role from, again, not just being partner, but now partner and parent for a very 24/7, attention and energy for a child that needs you. I don't know if that's too much imposing there, but is there something is there some potential that could be true for that or no? Or hard to say?
Yes, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's also, I mean, to some extent, it's also something that is adaptive to have that focus on your child and have that as a priority. And I think that's, I'm not sure if people really looked into that in terms of questionnaires and how they measured that, but I think it makes a lot of sense. Yes.
And so what about two things here? So I think it's in this study, or at least mentioned, there's first child, but then did you look at differences between second pregnancy, third pregnancy, fourth pregnancy as well? Yes. And what the differences were? Yes,
I did. Yeah.
And what did you find?
Yeah, it's a lot to get into because they have so many things in the study. But maybe start with when did they measure self-esteem and relationship satisfaction? So they started during pregnancy, and that's also a limitation. So we don't know if it's maybe already higher during pregnancy than before. For example, in relationship satisfaction, that could be the case. So they started at 70 weeks pregnant. So then they first
17.
17 weeks.
Second trimester, early second trimester, yeah?
Yeah.
Yes.
And maybe you're better at this with these trimesters. I'm always confused when with the weeks, and but I think that's correct. And then the second time point was when they were 30 weeks pregnant. So they were just asked to complete a questionnaire. So it's just a self-report questionnaire about self-esteem. So and self-esteem is also, that's like if you evaluate that you're just as much worth as others. So you think you're equal to others. So it's different than, for example, narcissism. It's not that you think that you're better than others, but just equally good.
Yes.
And then also relationship satisfaction was also just a self-report questionnaire of how satisfied you were with your relationship. So we have these 2 time points during pregnancy, and then we have 3 time points after birth of the child. So when the child was 6 months old, and when the child was 1.5 years old, and also when the child was 3 years old. So that was the last time point. So that's pretty good data, because usually we have a lot of data sets only have annual measures. So we can look more into these fluctuations within this really challenging and interesting period. So I think that's a really an advantage of this data set. Because if you have only 2 time points, you can only draw a straight line, have linear change. But here we can really look into the fluctuations during pregnancy and afterwards. So that's really nice. And what you're saying, indeed, we have a sample of first-time mothers, but also second, third, fourth, and even later. So we would compare that as well. So for self-esteem, what we found is that during pregnancy, they seem to decrease in self-esteem. So the third trimester, so 30 weeks of pregnancy, that's the third trimester or not? Am I saying this correctly? Or
Yes. That's so, third or very close to it.
Yes. Yeah. So that's kind of like, more near to labor, and also.
Yeah, very close.
Yeah, and
30,
then
37, 38 weeks is full term.
Yes,
so you're close. Yeah,
so that's kind of good to keep in mind when you think about these women. So their self-esteem seems to be a bit lower at this time point than at the first time point at 17 weeks of pregnancy. And then afterwards, it increases. So self-esteem is higher at 6 months after birth, so when the child is 6 months old. And then after, we find a gradual decline until 3 years, so the last time point, so when the child is 3 years old. So this is the pattern for self-esteem. This is always difficult to say on a podcast, because normally I have these really nice graphs where you can really see the fluctuations with all colors. But I hope it makes sense to people.
No. I'm tracking with it. I hear you.
Good.
So there's an increase, a decrease, another increase, and then another decrease. There's sort of a kind of a way in which this goes. Which again I don't want to infer, but most people when they get pregnant. Again, it's kind of in a normal traditional way. First, trimester or early second, 17 weeks. It's exciting. People get excited. Yes. They're pregnant. It's just especially the first one. Then usually closer to labor, it's like, the woman is usually very large at this point. They have maybe certain side effects from the pregnancy that aren't so pleasant, and usually just ready to be over with it. So that would. True. That kind of makes sense. And then sure, after first 6 months, you've had this child, it's your offspring, you're going to feel probably a little bit higher, right? You have a new identity, you have a new role. First 6 to 9 months, really, in my opinion, is so cool to see all the it's just every week you see changes in the child, which is really cool.
Yes.
And then at that, you said 1.5, 3 years is where it went down again. Yeah. So, yes. And that's usually where you're, teaching the child how to use the restroom, and they're more defiant and they start to become independent, and it's a very different thing. So that kind of pattern, just what we know on basic developmental milestones, seems to make intuitive sense. Yeah, but this is always nice, because if I say what the results are, you can always
find a good explanation for it afterwards. And I want to start by asking you, what would you expect for the second child? Do you expect the same pattern, or do you expect something different?
No, I would not expect the same pattern for the second child.
No?
Not quite. I don't know if it would be more or less, but I don't think it'll be the same pattern. I'll say that. So, but
see,
am I
this
wrong?
Is better. So now before I say what the results are, I just ask you what you think. That's better, because now I can say you're wrong. It's exactly the same. It's exactly the same pattern. So it's
for child 2.
Yes, and also for child 3 and 4, and it was also surprising to me, I must say. So I also expected different results for self-esteem for the second child. I thought maybe less of an impact, just that the fluctuations might be a bit smaller, or but it was completely the same.
The novelty is gone, right? It's like, I mean, obviously each pregnancy is different, each child is different, obviously. I mean, of course, but just the idea of pregnancy, right? It's like, well, I've done this before. You know, they have an idea of what it will be. Obviously, each one is different, but they have the idea of it. And that's why I would kind of assume that it would be not the same pattern, but it tracks, again, this is a large sample size. It tracks for second, third, and fourth pregnancies. All very, very similar type of ups and downs. Interesting.
Yes. Yeah. I thought it was also very interesting. It's something that, I didn't really expect. And I mean, there are things that we can reason why this would be the case for self-esteem. It might be that the changes in it might be related to body image, that we have this dip in at 30 weeks of pregnancy, that it's kind of similar every time. It might also have to do with hormonal changes, that's something that is similar for every pregnancy and every birth of the child. So that might be reasons for it. Yeah, so I'm actually myself not really sure. I mean, I didn't look at the explanations. I just described what was happening with these mothers.
Sure.
But I think it's also in this paper interesting to compare it to relationship satisfaction. So what we found there is that some similarities, but also some differences. So we found that for relationship satisfaction, it's actually high at the 30 weeks of pregnancy. So it's instead of with a low self-esteem, right? So for self-esteem, it was very low. And for relationship satisfaction, it was high at this 30 weeks of pregnancy, and also higher than at 17 weeks of pregnancy. So there seems to be a little bit of an increase there in relationship satisfaction during pregnancy. And then at 6 months, we also see something different, because for self-esteem, we found that it increased. Sorry, do I say it correctly? Yes, that increased, so that it became higher at 6 months. But for relationship satisfaction, it actually goes down. So you have this high relationship satisfaction at the 3rd trimester, and then it goes down after birth. This is also what I said before, right? That this is this sudden decline that is actually replicated in a lot of studies. So we don't only find it in these Norwegian mothers, but in many countries, we find this sudden decline in relationship satisfaction in the first year or in the first 6 months after birth of the child. So that's something we find in a lot of countries. And then the similarity is that in the years after, we also find this gradual decline in relationship satisfaction, similar to self-esteem. So there's a lot going on here, right? So it's many findings, and
it's interesting because it seems like there's an inverse, right? When there's increase in self-esteem, decrease in relationship satisfaction, and then the reverse in 17 and 30 weeks during pregnancy, when the self-esteem is low, then there's the higher relation, almost as if there's I would say, again, based on that is, that there's a need for someone to help or aid or assist, that you have these types of this relationship is helpful, right? I don't remember exactly how you look at relationship satisfaction, but that there's something during pregnancy that the relationship can be satisfying.
Yes. Yeah.
And so it sounds like there's this inverse. I can't remember. Is there a time where both are high, where you have high self-esteem and high relationship satisfaction, or no?
Yeah, at the first time point, they're both relatively high, I guess. So that's so that's at 17 weeks of pregnancy. And it's also what is difficult here is that we're now talking about the average level, but we also found that there's a positive correlation between the two. So if you look at just one person, if somebody is high in self-esteem, then they are usually also high on relationship satisfaction. And if somebody decreases in self-esteem, they usually also decrease in relationship satisfaction, and vice versa. So that if they increase in self-esteem, they usually increase in relationship satisfaction. So that makes it even more complex because it's always difficult to compare like average trajectories, and also the fact that there are a lot of individual differences, and these might be and these individual differences also show that on an individual level these things are correlated with each other. So it's so a lot of findings that I mean, you can speculate a lot about what this means. I think for relationship satisfaction, I mean, it's also what we talked about before with it's of course there are some things different about relationship satisfaction than it is for self-esteem. It might be less influenced by things like your body image and how you feel in that last trimester of pregnancy. That might be more strongly related to your self-esteem, and you can. Yeah, and I think that for relationship satisfaction, it's more a phase where you're both very excited, probably if everything goes well, about that you will have a child together. And then the biggest impact is more after birth, when you have to really work together and focus on the child instead of on your relationship, and all these changes that go along with that, with how to divide all the tasks. And this is a very challenging phase for your relationship. So that's something that's just a bit different for these two psychological constructs. But the gradual decline is something we find in both. So that's also interesting.
Yeah, because there's a shift that happens, right? There's a different way of being when you're just with somebody. You're married, or you cohabitate together, your partner, spouse, etc. And then there's a shift on focus and emphasis. And then as your paper shows, difference in self-esteem. There's difference in a lot of things than when you literally enter, a new person into the picture. And then all of those things start to morph and change and shift, which presents, different challenges. Let me ask a little bit about this. So this is a little bit in the weeds, but I'm just curious here. I think you put it in the strengths and weaknesses. So I can't remember if it was your selection or not, or if it was from the study itself, but the measures that were used. So the measure for self-esteem and the measure for relationship satisfaction have well, let me just start with the first. So the self-esteem was a 4-item of the Rosenberg self-esteem scale on a 4-point Likert scale. And the relationship satisfaction was a 5-item and on a 6-point Likert scale, which is a little better. Now, I guess my challenge with that is 4 items is very small. That's a very small measure, as is 5. And then, kind of in terms of the stats, 4-point Likert scale is, it's okay. 6-point is better. I mean, how did you kind of correct for that, or acknowledge that, or whatever as best that you could, to know that typically you want, just for listeners, you want more items, right?
Yes. Because definitely.
With more items. So the items can be questions is another way of saying it. 4 questions is not as robust to getting at the construct you're trying to measure. If you are trying to do something, if you had a 75 item or 100 question or a 75 question, you're able to do more internal validity, right? Because then you can start comparing items with each other. You can do some type of intrinsic aspects of that. And then on the Likert scale too, typically what's statistically reliable and valid is where you have definitely 5, but 7 point Likert scale. So it's not just a yes, no, and a maybe. That would be 3, right? You could have like a most likely, least likely, average, whatever. You can have 7 points on there. So how did you kind of factor that in? I mean, I'm sure you knew this as well, but how did you work with that?
Yeah, I love your focus here because, what I said, I'm a personality psychologist. So this is something I would definitely do better if I collect my own data.
Sure, of course.
We love many items, big questionnaires, and 7-point Likert skills. Of course, that's the best, and that's something that, of course, I had to work with what they did in this study. Sure. I think it's also set up maybe more from an economic perspective. I think they might have a different way of doing things. I'm not really sure. I cannot really say to be sure here, but so that's something that's definitely a limitation. And I think especially maybe to look at these, how people differ from each other. If you have just this smaller range of, for the Likert scale, I mean, that you only have a 1 to 4 or 1 to 5 scale. 1 to 5 is a bit better. I think that's okay. But then you can also not, maybe people cannot really answer if they feel a little bit better about their relationship compared to the previous time points.
Right.
There might not always be room for that if there's this limited amount of answers that you can give there. So I definitely agree there. Yeah, I mean, the reliability was okay if you look at the Cronbach's alpha, but was I think higher than 0.80, so that's okay. But still, more items would be much better. And one thing I do, but then I would really get into the statistics. I'm not sure how deep I would go there, but I use structural equation modeling.
Okay, so there are 2 things you did in this paper. You did on the stat side, structural equation modeling, and parallel process piecewise growth curve model, which I do not expect us to go into the fine details of these 2. But maybe just kind of give an overview of, basically we talked a little bit about the measurements of trying to understand from this 80,000 cohort of or sample size from Norway. And so, when you get all this information and data, there's a certain way in which we to analyze that using quantitative methods. And so if you could just briefly explain, okay, you're trying to answer these 3 questions and you're going about it using this type of analysis. And so maybe just explain the underlying piece of that.
Yes. Yeah. So I can start with like the structural equation modeling. I think that's, I will try to not make it too technical. So I think what I like about it here is that it might be that self-esteem also has a different meaning during pregnancy compared to after pregnancy. So that's you want to make sure that you tap into the same thing. And that's people answer it in a similar way. And that's something you can test also if you test for measurement invariance. And that's something you could also do with structural equation modeling. So in this model, instead of taking one average score and only putting this average score in the model, so the average of these 4 items for self-esteem, for example, you put all the items in the model. And then you estimate what we call like a latent factor. And that's of course, we never measure something directly in psychology. So that also makes sense if you have a latent factor. So you cannot measure self-esteem directly. So we have these items and they then load on what we think is self-esteem, what's the latent construct. And by testing for measurement invariance, you can see if these items load on that latent construct in a similar way. And that's the idea, is that taps into if people answer it in a similar way, if it has the same meaning for them during pregnancy compared to after, in this case. So that's what we try to test there. Yep. And I think the nice thing is here that although we have limited measures, only 4 items, and of course the Likert scale, that's a bit limited as well. In this way, you can also kind of control for measurement error. So that's also in that structural equation model. And that makes it a bit better, although of course the output is just as good as what you put into it. So if you have a limited measure, you have to deal with that. So I agree still with that it's something that if I would set up a study myself, I would have more items for self-esteem. But I think it's also a trade-off. I mean, for these very big longitudinal studies with 80,000 mothers, there are so many people involved in a team that collects this data, and they all want different things. And they have to make sure to ask everything that they want to. It was also a lot of questions on health, for example. And just to make it feasible for the participants, it's just not possible to ask many questions for every construct. Right. So that's just something that you have to deal with usually with these large panel studies or longitudinal studies. So that's just what we have to deal with in this case.
The trade-off is well, you want a high end, you have more power. It's much better. You have more people to select from. The thing is, well, you can't always control the measures that are given, okay, it's not the end of the world. But you have a large number, which is really good. And then briefly, the piecewise growth.
Yeah. So what's a piecewise already says it in the name, of course. That's the idea is that you use the timing to really see if motherhood, if the transition itself, the birth of a child, triggered changes. So you compare, so you have the raw data, and then you kind of try to fit a model on top of that. And you see which model fits best. So then you have a model where you assume that there is only gradual change, so that there's not a sudden shift in self-esteem or relationship satisfaction around birth, but only a gradual change pattern. And if that would fit the data best, then we actually say, well, there's no clear effects of the birth of a child because you only find this gradual change. But if you find that there is sudden shifts in self-esteem or relationship satisfaction around birth, then you would say we have some indication that the birth of a child causes changes in self-esteem and relationship satisfaction. So another way of saying this is that there are different phases. So you have the phase during pregnancy, around birth, and after. And if you really find that a model in which you model these three phases fits the data best, then you have some proof that there that childbirth triggers these changes.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's probably the best explanation I've ever heard of that.
Yeah, really? Oh, okay.
That's great.
It's also sometimes called interrupted time series. So there's maybe, if there are some listeners that are into these models, and there are so many different terms for this, but that's, and the parallel process, that's the idea that you model both self-esteem and relationship satisfaction at the same time. So that you can also see how they link to each other. Yeah.
Okay, so you told us a little bit about the results. So maybe we can, from this point, go to the kind of the conclusion, or you can recap the results and then just kind of the conclusion from. I think in the conclusion you put 4 or 5 different main points about the study and what you're able to find and how it worked.
Yes. So I think that's the main conclusion is that relationship satisfaction and self-esteem are associated or influenced by the transition to motherhood. So they do show changes, and we find also what I just said about these change patterns that are different phases. That you really see these sudden shifts around childbirth, and you see also a different change pattern in the years after that. So that's something that really shows that motherhood causes is always a difficult word, but it's associated with changes in self-esteem and relationship satisfaction. And for self-esteem, we found that this change pattern was replicated for the first, second, third, and fourth child. So we really find this replication of the dip in the third trimester, and then increases, and then again decreases after that. But for relationship satisfaction, I didn't mention this yet, but this so many findings in this paper, right? This relationship satisfaction, it was actually different for the first child compared to the second, third, and fourth child. So for the first child, we found this sudden decline 6 months after birth. So this sudden decline in relationship satisfaction. But for the second, third, and later child, we didn't find that. We found more a gradual decline after birth. So it was more gradual instead of that sudden dip 6 months after childbirth. So that was different than for self-esteem. And so that's interesting that for relationship satisfaction, there seems to be something unique for the first child. So the first child that you get, and what we were talking about before, it might be related to, really shifting your from being a partner and also being a parent, and also how you divide the roles and becoming the role division becoming more traditional. That's something that happens. Maybe also work-family balance might be something that's more unique for the first child compared to the second or the third. So these are things that might be related to that finding. And then I also mentioned before that they are correlated. So that's also from that parallel process piecewise model. What we see is that self-esteem and relationship satisfaction are positively correlated, the changes over time. So it's like if you increase your relationship satisfaction, you're also more likely to increase in self-esteem. And if you decrease in relationship satisfaction, you're also more likely to decrease in self-esteem. So that's the other finding. I think these might be the most important ones.
On the last one there, it sounds, again, you can't probably prove it exactly, but it sounds like there is some linkage between the two, between self-esteem and relationship satisfaction, which is deeply fascinating. Because there's I don't want to say a dependency, but there's a linkage there. Yeah, I don't want to speculate too far into it, but it's interesting that's the correlation there, particularly with mothers. Now, again, the caveat here, which I think is something that you probably mentioned in the limitations, is this is all in Norway. So, right. I don't know what it's like in the Netherlands. I don't know what it's like in the United States. I don't know what it's like. But I think that, that aside, is that there's definitely, I think if you take, because there's other pieces to this, right? What are the ideas or norms about parenting and cohabitating or partners or romantic relationships in Norway as, different from the Netherlands, United States, I'm sure there are differences. It's a different culture.
Yes. Yeah.
But all that aside is how to, I think that what you can find from this study, which is so powerful, is so many data points and the stats are really good, is to me, I would say, and again, this might be an inference, but there's a human element, I think, to this. Right? That I think that we can definitely understand that it is a change for any human on the planet when they change as a young adult from, being in a relationship to then being in a relationship with a child and what that's like to become a parent. We all know what that universal human experience is like. Obviously, there's going to be differences with cultures and people around the world, but there is something of, I guess you could say, motherhood, which will unite people globally, right?
Yes, yeah, that's also how I usually, what I take away from this paper is also that, we're talking about norms and differences between cultures, but in Norway, one thing that's very positive there is that they have a good system with parental leave, and it's that's all arranged great. I think that's better than in the Netherlands, even, where we still
definitely better than here. That's for in the United States.
Yeah, but I think the Netherlands is also a bit behind, actually, because for fathers, we used to have. I think this is only like 2 years ago or something, that we had like only 2 days that they got parental leave officially. Now it's increased. I'm not really sure. I think a couple of weeks, so it's a lot better now. But Norway, it's definitely more than that. But still, that's different from societal norms. It might still be that they have some more traditional ideas of parenthood and the role of the mother and the father. So that's not always in line with the policy of the country. So it could be that these both have an effect on that. But I think that for relationship satisfaction, we know from other countries that this also happens, that people decline in relationship satisfaction. And I think it's already important for people to know that, and beforehand to also really set some expectations for yourself, and talk with your partner a lot about how to divide the roles and what's responsibilities, and is it 50-50 or so. That's something that is very important to do beforehand, I think.
Yes, 110% yes. Let me tell you, doing clinical work, I work mostly with adults, and I do couples work, not a lot, a few, or even if I just work with individuals, and sometimes they'll talk about their challenges in their marriages or relationships. But I over the past I'd say good 7 to 10 years that I've worked in clinical work, it always astounds me how much I'll see a couple, or and they'll come in and they'll say issues about with their parent, with being parents with their children, and then I'll ask at some point, I'll say, well, what was the conversation like before you got married or decided to have kids, that about your guys' kind of intuitions, and what you kind of bring from your own story and your own history, and what did you guys lay out about how you wanted to be parents? Overwhelmingly, most of the time, it's, yeah, we never had that conversation. What? It's like, yeah, we never talked about that. What? Like, before you decided to commit, your life with this person, right, in holy matrimony, and you wanted to have kids, you never once had a conversation about, like, how would you do discipline? How would you do positive reinforcement? How would you, have certain types of norms for certain kids that you have?
Yeah, that's also surprising to me. Yeah, but
even if it, I could get a new a new client that's a couple next week, and start seeing them, and if that were to happen, it would still surprise me. I've heard this so many times, and every time it always is just like, wow, it's just it always kind of, it doesn't shock me, but it does kind of like jolt me a little bit, like, wow, this couple's been together 11 years, and they've never had a conversation about it. Like, it's always puzzling to me. So, but yes, I think what you're saying, I agree 110%, is it stresses the need to have those conversations.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
in one way, that's a reason of why you're dating, or why you're with somebody. You're trying to figure out, are they a good fit for you? Is at some, maybe not initially, but at some point you date them long enough, like, how would you be as a parent? And maybe we don't align, or we'll have to figure it out. Or is there enough of a foundational kind of heuristic that makes sense for both partners? At least a conversation. But it's very interesting. So yeah. I guess,
and I think for self-esteem it's kind of different, because there it's more like, it's similar for every birth, and like for first time, second time. And also there's one finding that I didn't mention yet. It's just I have so many findings in this study. It has been a while that I looked at this paper, but it's is that some mothers participated twice, which is great, because then we had information about when they were pregnant the first time and the second time. And what we saw there was kind of I was kind of thing to me to see that it was not that they showed a long-term decline in self-esteem. So it's kind of, if you look across these, so the first time they participated and the second time, you see the same fluctuation that we talked about before, but it's not like the level really continues to decline across these multiple pregnancies. So it seems to be, maybe going back to their baseline level. So it's really a fluctuation in self-esteem. And that's, to me, a finding that I think, it's maybe good for women to know that it's normal to have these fluctuations during pregnancy. Even these women in Norway with this great system, they also show the fluctuations. And it also doesn't mean that it will really decline in the long term. And many also recover and they get back to their just their level of self-esteem they had before. So that's something that was interesting to me to see. No,
it's also encouraging too, I think, at least for
that's true.
It's not a there's a life change and then there's this like descent downward continuously, right? It kind of ebbs and flows and then it kind of plateaus and then it kind of has a sort of baseline. So that is very encouraging to know as well. I'll say just for yourself, I mean, before we move on to the next big study is, what was it like, kind of doing this? And I mean, my goodness, I mean, published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. I mean, that's nothing to be shy about. That's a premier journal, especially in psychology. What was all that experience? I mean, your first author. I mean, what was all that? What was all that experience like for you?
Yeah, I was, I don't know. I think I'm somebody who really dives into these things, and I'm also just try to do the best research possible. And also as a PhD student, I really didn't know how I compared to others. So I really didn't know if I had a chance to be published in JPSP. I mean, I thought, okay, aim high, but I had no clue if this was even possible for me. Yes, so I was really happy about it, of course. But I also think that, I mean, what I sometimes might be a little bit too perfectionistic, that I really, every detail I thought about and wrote about, and I just think about I do so many robustness checks and run the model so many times to really make sure that what I'm doing is correct. And yes, so that's something that I really enjoy. Also to find the best way to test a research question. I really love that, to really find the connection between the statistical model and the theory. So that's something that's is very enjoyable to me, to find that match. So that's, and also to get the best out of this data sets. And so that's something I really enjoy, but I'm also happy that my efforts paid off and that it worked. I mean, it's also thanks to my great collaborators. I mean, I did this together with my advisors, Wiebke Blijdoorn and Jaap Denissen. And then we had Christian Tams, who is from Norway, to help us with some of the Norwegian questions if I didn't know what they asked exactly to these mothers. Right. And Joanne Chung, also my collaborator, also helped me with some of the modeling. So just having a great team is very helpful. Yeah, for sure. So I enjoyed it a lot. Yeah.
No, that's great. It's great. I mean, when I release this, I'll put it in the notes and everyone can read it. It's a great paper. It's really awesome stuff. Okay.
Thanks.
Let's do the next one. This was the one that was getting, there were some looks on this online. This is how I found out about it. Someone was posting it online and it was getting talked about, at least with some of the I think some of the sociologists.
Yes.
Here. So you wrote a paper on divorce. It's a lovely topic. Happens a lot. So let me see here. What was the aim of this paper, while you were looking at it? And I believe for this one, you use a German data set.
True. Right? Yes. I used a German
only,
set,
right? You didn't use some other. So just kind of tell us the main hypotheses and the main goal of this paper.
Sure. Yes. So we used the socioeconomic panel study for this data set for this paper, and I think divorce has been studied more often, and I mean there are some papers already on how people change in their life satisfaction, which is the outcome in the study during divorce or after divorce, and there were also already some longitudinal studies on this. But the main contribution of this study was to also look at the control sample. So to compare changes in people that go through divorce to people that don't, that remain married. So that was the main goal of this paper. Yeah. So that's, I think, the main contribution. And then we did a lot of stuff to find the best control sample. So that's kind of the goal here.
That was the thing that stuck out to me. I was like, oh, wow, they used a control sample that with married couples. And then on top of that, which was awesome, which was that you know, this stuff, I mean, I don't know if people really appreciate this, but there's so many variables to when you're trying to do these types of studies. I mean, it's just very complicated. Like there's so many things to deal with. But I thought that having the starting point of year of marriage was really awesome as well, right? Because you can see, okay, here's the control group that, you know, the control group is, you know, a set of married couples. And then here's the actual subject group, which is the divorcees or whatever. But you all started from their first year of marriage. Was that correct?
Yes. Yeah, that's correct.
Right?
Yeah.
And then
so
see
they
how
were,
the trajectory goes.
Yeah. So they were observed during the transition to marriage as well. So that's the great thing of this socioeconomic panel study. It started in 1984, and then they have annual measures of life satisfaction. And then we could just make a sample selection because there are more than 10,000 people in this data set, and we can then select a sample that is observed to transition into marriage. So that's the first starting point, and then we have people that don't go through divorce that remain married. So this is the control sample, and we have people that will go through divorce in the years after that. So that's how we selected the sample. So that's the great thing of these longitudinal panel studies, because if you would collect data yourself and you want to study divorce, how would you start with that? I mean, then you would. That's not possible to have these measures before divorce, because then you end up with maybe people going through divorce and looking back or something. So that's the the advantage here.
Yeah. So I think just for listeners, that's the important point, is that the control and the group and then the group that was also actually studied are from the same data set.
Yes,
right? It wasn't like externalized or something like that. It was, okay, here's a group of folks, you know, in this German panel study, and these stayed married and these didn't. And then you can analyze, and then obviously with various hypotheses. And how many people were in this panel? I'm forgetting now.
I think it was so in the whole panel, there are more than 10,000 people, but the ones I selected was a smaller group. So these are now I have to also do this by heart. Let me think. It was, I think, around 780 divorcees and bigger control sample. So people in the control sample that remained married. And it was smaller also because we wanted to observe them from the year of marriage onwards. So if there was no information on that, or they started the panel later, because not everybody started in 1984, they have a lot of refreshment samples. And therefore, it limited our sample size a bit, but still it was, relatively large, I think, for psychological studies. So it was good enough to look into this.
So you wanted to look at life satisfaction, but then also the individual differences that changed as well, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
And let me see, what was the piece of it that, as you were, putting this together and formulating it, what were some of the other questions that you had for this?
So it's, we just, from previous studies, we already know that life satisfaction declines in many years before the divorce, so that there's like this anticipation effect, or sociologists always say lead effects. So I actually also worked with a demographer on this paper. So the second author, Thomas Leopold, he was the one I started working with during my postdoc, and he also worked at the sociology department. So that's also, I think, why sociologists like this paper, is because it's also more linked to that field. So there are many studies already done on this, showing these anticipation effects, that people decline in life satisfaction many years before that. Even like 5 years before the divorce, you already see these declines that might reflect that people are not really doing well in their relationship. And then what we usually find after that is that people then show an increase in life satisfaction after the divorce. But then the question is if they return to their baseline, or is it that they still show long-term effects of the divorce, that they never recover fully? And that's the question we try to answer in this paper, because the question is also how to measure baseline.
Right.
What's the baseline? And what you already mentioned, we thought it would be most elegant to start in year of marriage. So that's a good baseline to start. But then that's also not enough, because another question is, if you compare this to the year of marriage, it might be that most people are a bit higher in the year of marriage and decline a little bit, regardless of whether they go through divorce or not. And therefore, we also need a control sample to control for the actually pretty normative declines we also see in married couples, that they start off very high in the year of marriage, that they have high life satisfaction, and they just show a bit of a decline in the years after. And then you also have to take this into account if you want to measure recovery after divorce. You have to take into account the fact that even if people don't go through divorce, they also decline in life satisfaction. So that's why we needed a control sample. Yeah,
that's great. I think what might be helpful here is, if you want, just briefly, because obviously they're kind of large, talking about the adaptation, right, level theory, and the chronic strain model. These two models here. Maybe just more on the theory side first, and then we can get into some of the results.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a good way to start with theory always. Actually, the early theories on hedonic adaptation, or there are different versions of this theory. So you have adaptation level theory, or set point theory is another word for it. And these early versions, they assume that everybody has this set points, also kind of based in just your genetics of life satisfaction, and that you're just some people are just more happy than others, and that sometimes if you go through something like divorce or another life events, it might be that you have short-term increase or decrease in life satisfaction, but after a while you adapt and go back to your set points. That was the theory, that you then, and it could also be a positive event, right? So that's maybe if you become a parent, what we were talking about before, that you increase a bit in life satisfaction, and then afterwards you after a couple of years you might return back to your baseline, your set points of life satisfaction. So that's the early version of the theory. And if this is true, we would expect people, if they go through divorce, that after a couple of years, so they first show a dip in life satisfaction, especially in the year of divorce, and then after that they recover. And if they recover fully, they go back to their baseline, which might be measured in the year of marriage, or maybe compared to the control sample, what I talked about before. The chronic strain model is more that this might not be true. So it might not be that you completely recover. You might still show some recovery, but especially with divorce. So chronic strain is also more related to negative events like divorce. That's because of the loss of marital resources, and you can see marital resources in a very broad sense. So you can think of support from your partner, but also financial losses, that you have less income, or that it's there even health might decline after divorce. So this is also something that some studies find. So the chronic strain model is more than we would expect long-term declines in life satisfaction. People don't recover fully. So that's kind of the difference between those two. But I must say, like, these theories on hedonic adaptation, they already kind of are revised a lot. So they now also incorporate the idea that it might be that people don't always recover fully. So they also have some ideas on that negative events might especially have long-term effects as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, it's another more of a, it seems like a more of a focused kind of way of talking about what we always talk about in psychology or the social sciences at large, which is this nature nurture type of thing, right? Which is,
yes,
there's a genetic component. There are certain things that are, if you take a strict materialist kind of approach, right, that there are some deterministic factors, some of these immutable traits, et cetera, which can scale all the way down to personality. They can scale down to temperament. They can scale down to even certain things like these set points, as you're saying. And then there are obviously other theories that will claim that various life stressors and or environmental concerns are also implicated as well. And so, both of these models and or theories are, to me, and how I read it, is they have validity. They have,
yes, they do. Yeah,
they have. I don't think it's an either
or. No, that's true. Yeah. No, I also don't believe that. No, I think both make sense. And what we talked about before with the big five being like more stable and life satisfaction being less stable, I think that's also interesting to think about it that way. And I think that also, if you look at these twin studies we talked about before, for life satisfaction, the heritability is usually a bit lower than for the big five. So I think around 30% of the individual differences in life satisfaction are usually found to be explained by our genetic makeup, and 70% by the environment. So there we also have more, more reasons to expect life events to have an impact than for the big five.
Yeah. No, that again also makes sense.
Yeah.
Again, I'm thinking back to my conversation I had with Wolfinger, where, I remember from the conversation we talked about marriage is a really good thing for people, right? It's typically a net positive. I mean, you have, better economics, better well-being, typically better health. People are typically more satisfied, I would say, in theory, on overall, and what we understand from the literature.
Yeah, so, but compared to, that's always a good point, right? That's where the control group comes into.
Yes. So that's why this paper is really interesting, is because it's like, okay, well, what is it like if, or when folks divorce? How does their life satisfaction, where does it land, right? Because if marriage offers you a lot of good things, at least for time, how do divorcees gain some of that or not, if much of their satisfaction is in the marriage itself? So tell us about then the kind of the study itself. What did you do, and how did you do it? And we kind of go through all the things we did in the other paper as well. What were you looking for?
Yeah. So what I think, I really like the counterfactual thinking here. So that it's just like it was such a nice how I started this paper together with Thomas Leopold, that we just were thinking like, oh, what's the best control sample here, and how can we do this? So if you would think like in an ideal world, we would have like alternative life where we have people that we follow and they go through divorce, and we compare them to themselves if they stay married. Of course, this is not possible. We only have one life, so we cannot do that. But that would be the ideal counterfactual here. How would they do it in studies is experimental studies, of course, also have a very good counterfactual. So there they can randomly assign somebody to a condition, to an intervention, or to a certain type of medication. And that's also great. However, here we cannot really do that, right? We cannot say, we will say, this person will go through divorce and that person will not. So that random assignment is not ethical in real life if you look at these life events. So that's why we have to find a way around it. So that was kind of like our reasoning here. How do we get the best counterfactual in this sample? So we already talked about starting like in the year of marriage, following people that will go through divorce and people that don't go through divorce. And then an additional thing we did was that we matched them on a lot of aspects in that year of marriage. So for every divorcee, we tried to find the best counterfactual, the best, like you could say a twin that's similar in age, in socioeconomic status, in having children or not. So a lot of different factors that we could measure there, and then try to find the best match for every divorcee. So that's done with propensity score matching. That's the technique we used. And based on this technique, what you then end up with is a control sample that is similar to the divorcees in their propensity to go through divorce. So based on all these covariates that you put in the model and where you match them on, just let me know if I get too technical, but then they also have a similar chance of going through divorce in the coming years as the divorce sample. However, they do not. So that's the idea there, that you kind of try to make a sort of an experimental study with observational data.
No, that's great. I think the counterfactual element is really a cool way of looking at it, and you can sort of kind of do that with this German sample, which is really, really cool. And I think that aspect of it, of course, I probably wouldn't have said it that way at the time, but that aspect of it was probably what drew me to the paper to begin with. I was like, oh, this is cool. I haven't seen something like this. This is kind of cool. So that's really, 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 really awesome. Okay. So we had said before, so it was 787 divorcees, 1,629 non-divorcees. Okay. So there's your control sample.
Yeah.
And so there were the three questions, right? Which was, how the divorce process associated with mean level change in life satisfaction, right? So after divorce or that whole process, what is it, mean level, how does it change life satisfaction? The second question is divorce process associated with individual differences in change in life satisfaction. And then the third is what could explain those individual differences in life satisfaction across divorce process. And so I guess, how did you come to those questions in particular? And were there other ones that you wanted to look at, but just couldn't?
I think that these questions are also already looked at in previous studies, although without a control sample. And I think for for these three questions, I just saw that a control sample could add something. So I could really build on previous studies and say, they already find mean level change. They already find individual differences and some factors that might explain it, but they never looked at a control sample before. So for mean level change, we already talked about that it's interesting to take that into account because people also decline if they don't go through divorce. So just to compare that. And for individual differences as well, then if you can show like, okay, divorcees, they differ in how they change across time. But without a comparison group, that doesn't say anything. That's interesting, but people that don't go through divorce also differ in how they change across time. Right. So, so that's something also where the control group comes in. And for predictors of change, you can also, for example, say parents might show stronger changes in life satisfaction. or they might also show declines. And then you don't know if that's unique for people that go through divorce or if that's something that always happens. So even if you look at these predictors of change, like parenthood, if people are parents or not, then also the control group is good to have. Yeah. So that's how we build on previous literature here.
Well, no, and that's a fantastic point, because so much of, I mean, I've talked about it plenty here on the podcast, which is, we have a replication crisis in psychology, right?
Yes, so we do. Yeah,
it's a really big problem. And so the fact that there's a strong element of that here is, deserves great applause. That's good to see. It's good to see that stuff. And so for the measures, the life satisfaction was just the single item, right?
Yes.
And so in that case, but this was on an 11-point Likert scale. So again, I mean, this is, double probably, or close to double what you want, if you want 5 at least, or, 7. So 11 points is great, from completely dissatisfied to completely satisfied. There's a whole range of options. So even though it's one item, having one item that has a good range, it seems to be much better in terms of trying to assess for life satisfaction. And again, this is something that you probably couldn't control, obviously.
No, yeah.
What it was, whatever the Germans were doing. So
yeah.
Right. Now you guys put in 4 moderators. Yeah.
Yes.
It says gender, age, children living in household, and marriage length. Now, was that coming from the data set that you had, or was there other reasons why you included those 4 and not other ones?
I think there were multiple reasons. Also because studies already shown that these factors do play a role. And we're also limited to the data we have. So it's maybe we could have included more, but I think this was also a good start like this. Especially gender has some interesting findings if we compare it to the control sample. So there we, Yes. So also, I don't know. I think that's with this paper, it's also just to demonstrate what the control sample can do. And I think that we would never, our goal was not to come close to completely explaining why people change with these moderators of change. So just focus on 2 or 4, that are kind of found in a lot of studies to have an effect on divorce, but are never compared to a control sample. That was kind of, what we tried to do here.
Yeah, no, it's great. I think sometimes it's hard for people that don't, or have never done, or minimal amount of, scientific research, is to always understand that, there's never one variable that gives you the answer. There's always a multiplicity of variables. And so, as the investigators, you can determine which ones that you're loading into. And so these all made sense when I read it. I just didn't know if there was any other considerations. So you used the structural equation modeling, which we already talked about, right? Nice explanation of that. So this is something I'm not too familiar with, so maybe you can explain it to me. You talked about the piecewise growth curve models, but the propensity score matching. Can you explain that to me a little bit? I'm not familiar.
Yeah, so this is what I just tried to explain a little bit already, but it's difficult to not get too technical here, but that's when you try to find a twin, So you try to, so you have this, so you go to the year of marriage, and in that year, you measure all these variables in both samples, and you try, for example, if you have one person that goes through divorce, so one divorcee, and you want to match it to somebody of the control sample. So you try to find somebody with this method, try to find somebody who's similar in age, in background, in these pre-existing covariates to get the counterfactual for every person. And that's what this technique tries to accomplish. So for every person in the divorce sample, you try to find this twin.
Okay, good. And so what did you find? What were the results?
So we found a lot of twins. So it's yeah, no, but it's but I think it worked because we did find that they after we did the matching and we found that they were very similar. We found people that were very very similar in the year of marriage but did not go through divorce. So that's good that we found a good control sample. And then after that, we actually assigned an artificial year of divorce to the control sample to have a similar time scale. So that's also something fun to do because then they have a match in the divorce sample. So we just took that year of divorce also for the controls to have a similar time scale. And what we found is that, actually coming back to what we said about the theories, both having some truth in it, that we find that people show declines in even 5 years before divorce. So for a long time before divorce, we find these declines, but also the control sample shows declines. So these people that were matched in the year of marriage, but do not go through divorce, they also declined in life satisfaction. And then in the year of divorce, we find a sudden decline, so a more steep decline. And then afterwards, we do see the recovery in the divorce sample. But they never go back to their baseline in the year of marriage. And also they never recover compared to the control sample, although that difference is smaller. So if you compare their life satisfaction 5 years after divorce to the year of marriage, you see that they show, a pretty big decline in life satisfaction. But when you take into account that people that do not go through divorce also decline, then the difference is much smaller. So there seems to be more recovery if you compare it that way. Yeah.
So, yes, it's very fascinating. So, because I think it's telling you something about marriage in general, right? Implicit, I don't like using that word too much, but implicit in all this is, okay, so if people, so one way of looking at this is that divorce is not a single moment, right? It's not, or single year, or, whatever. If you take the very easy one to pick on, right? Adultery, right? Someone cheats on someone. It's not that thing.
No, yeah.
That's that event or that thing or that relationship. That's not the thing. There's usually a slow, kind of a slow burn of sorts, or there's a slow buildup towards divorce, right? And so, but that sounds like for people that stay married or actually divorce is the same. I mean, there is a decline a couple of years after marriage. And then for those that divorce, there's like another, I don't know if there might be some antecedent or some kind of life stressor or something that decline then further declines right when the divorce happens. But over time, there's people that divorcees, they are able to recover, but they don't go back to where it was, either before they were married or very early on in marriage. They can be more adaptive, if you will, but they're not going to have the same level of satisfaction as maybe the group that stays married and keeps going. Or is that about right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. So it's also, if you look at the declines before divorce, although I said that the control group also declines, it is steeper in the decline is stronger in the divorce sample. So you do see these effects already before divorce, just to make that clear. And that's also interesting. So that's already like an indicator that, it's really not going that well. And I actually think that it also might indicate that for some people, it might be a good decision after having more than 5 years of declines in life satisfaction, that you think, yes, I should not continue this because it's really not working. So, Yeah.
And many times I think people will divorce because, what is it? Irreconcilable differences, right? You just don't get along anymore. It doesn't work out. Maybe there was an event or series of events, but the divorce seems to be some type of, many times, relief. Now, obviously it's a loss, right? It's a loss for sure. There's a loss of many things, right? But there seems to be like, I just got to, break away from this. And I agree with you. I think in many cases that may be the best choice or the best decision. But I wonder also, though, if the idea is to try and find some relief or respite, it doesn't seem like that will really that will happen in one way, but you're not going to have this like jolt or burst of life satisfaction as soon as you're done with the marriage. Now, you didn't look at it in this paper, I don't believe so, but there is certain, I know there's data on folks that remarry and what that looks like, and certain patterns that happen there as well. I don't know if you want to say anything about that. I don't think it's in this paper, but
no, it was not really possible to look into that because of the sample selection. The information we had after divorce was kind of limited because we selected a smaller sample, and then you have some what we call right censoring, that's some dropouts at the end, and therefore it was not really possible to look into moderators related to the phase after divorce, so the repartnering, for example. So I cannot really say anything concrete on that, although I think that it's very important and interesting, and that people might recover more if they repartner. But you do see here that after that initial drop in the year of divorce, then you see an increase in life satisfaction. So there seems to be some adaptation. And I think it's very much a mix of things. So it's like the loss of a lot, and also maybe, the relief, what you said, after all these years of a decline in life satisfaction that might indicate a lot of marital conflicts happening in these years. So it's very much a mixed bag of different things that go on in this sample as well. And this is only mean level, right? So we also looked at the individual differences, so the second question. And what we saw there was also interesting because what I said, in itself, finding individual differences so that people don't all show this mean level trajectory, but really differ from each other, it might not be that interesting. But if you compare it to the control group, I think what is very interesting is that we found that in the years before divorce, they show similar variance, these groups. So the control sample and the divorce sample both show individual differences to the same extent in how they change in life satisfaction. But in the year of divorce, you see that the divorce sample actually shows larger deviations from this mean level trajectory compared to the control sample. So the individual differences in change kind of increase in the control sample. And the same goes for the years after. That's people just show more heterogeneity in the divorce sample compared to the control sample in how they change across time in life satisfaction. So there are more people that just go up or down. There's much more differences in how people change, reflecting maybe that it has such a different impact on people.
It's interesting that the variance that's occurring between individuals that have these different experiences. I mean, because we were talking at first about the mean level, but now you're explaining how there are there's larger variance between at the kind of individual level. Is there any ideas that you have about why that is, or why that could be?
So we found that people show larger individual differences in change in the divorce sample compared to the control sample. So that they, especially in the year of divorce and after divorce, you see a lot of differences in how people develop or change in their life satisfaction. So that some people might go down, others go up. So it can go in many directions, and that might reflect how heterogeneous the process is, that it's really different from one person to the next, how they experience it. Of course, in this paper, it's not that we looked at all the explanations for this, why some people might increase and why others might decrease. I mean, I actually looked at just individuals, and sometimes I really see that one person goes up in life satisfaction, even in the year of divorce. So even that is possible in this sample, at least. I think one thing that's interesting is that we also find these gender differences. So that's one explanation, is that men experience it differently than women in this sample, especially in the year of divorce. So we see that men show a larger drop in life satisfaction in the year of the divorce compared to women. And that's the explanation that we thought might make sense here is that if you look in Germany at least, women file for divorce more often than men do. So it might be that it's more unexpected to to the majority of men in that case. So that's I'm not sure how this compares to other countries actually. So this is just something I looked up to make sure that I interpret the data from Germany the right way, but it might be different in other countries. But so that's something that women also might therefore show a smaller drop in life satisfaction in a year of divorce. But also men did recover a little bit more afterwards. So they are actually 5 years after divorce, they are on the same level of life satisfaction. So it's not that we find these differences in the long term, it's only that short-term change that's different in the year of divorce. So that's one of these moderators that explains why people differ.
So it sounds like there's a lot of variance.
Yes.
Where mean level was a little bit more around the same aspect, but the individual differences are there's a larger variance of a pool there. And so I guess what about the third question, right? The individual differences, or what explains the individual differences in life satisfaction across the whole divorce process? Because I think in the paper you had talked about pre-divorce, during divorce, I forget the name, and then post-divorce. So what were the results based on the third question?
Yes, that's kind of similar as with the other paper, right? That we had these three phases and that we then had these pieces of change. And what we did here is also to see if the change you experience before divorce is also associated with how you change afterwards. And so what we found is that people, if they show stronger declines in life satisfaction before divorce, they actually show also stronger increases after divorce. So it's a negative correlation between these phases. And that's very interesting, but also very hard to interpret. I'm not really sure if we can, because also in the control sample, we find similar processes. So we also find that change in one phase is negatively correlated with change in another phase. So it seems to be that if you show strong declines in years across 5 years, and then you look at the next years, you are more likely to increase again in life satisfaction. So it might just be these more normative fluctuations around the set points that we find here, instead of something that's really related to divorce. So here also the control sample is important, that we find similar correlations there and similar ways in which different phases in life link to each other. That's kind of puts that in a different perspective than if you only look at the divorce sample. But it's difficult to say exactly why this happens. So it might also be something more statistical with floor and ceiling effects. And so I'm not really sure actually what's happening there. It's
As I said in the beginning, I think when we're talking about this stuff is so hard. There's so many variables going on. And so even though you have a lot of really, really good data and again, using a kind of control group within the sample is super awesome. There are still, I don't want to say gaps, but there are still gray areas around things where it's not completely pinpoint specific. So I guess just in kind of summary of this piece, what are some conclusions you can make and you can feel confident to say about divorce and life satisfaction and what it looks like based on this sample?
Yes, I think there are some general things we can take away from this. So the first thing is that this trajectory of life satisfaction in people that go through divorce is best described by 3 phases. So there are 3 phases of change. You have this anticipation phase, or that's pre-divorce phase where people decline in life satisfaction. And then the second phase is the year of divorce, where we see this sudden decline in life satisfaction. And then we have the phase after divorce, where you see gradual increases in life satisfaction. So the fact that we find these 3 phases and not only gradual change without a sudden shift in the year of divorce does tell us that divorce does something with life satisfaction, that there's, we can really see the timing that is related to divorce with these three phases. So I think that's very interesting. And then the second main finding is that these individual differences in change, that people show a lot of differences in how they change, especially in the year of divorce and the years after divorce. So some people go up, others go down in life satisfaction. And that variance, these differences are also larger compared to the control sample. So it's really something related to divorce, why people seem to go in all these different directions for life satisfaction. That the divorce triggers these individual differences, actually. And then, for these moderators of change, I think the biggest one was gender, actually. What I just said about the year of divorce, that it seems to be that men suffer more from the divorce in the year of divorce, but because they show a quicker recovery, they actually, after 5 years, they are on the same level as women that go through divorce. So then you don't see the difference anymore. And well, related to the theory, to end with that, I think that what we see is that there is some truth in both theories, that you can see that they do recover to some extent, but not fully. So even if you compare to the control sample, they are still lower in life satisfaction 5 years after divorce compared to people that are very similar to them in the year of marriage, but that remain married. So that's how it relates to that theory. So there's some chronic strain, but also some adaptation.
So I guess what I hear from this is that there seems to be something about marriage itself that is, there is some strain leading up to this. It almost feels like there's like a crossroads that people get to, right? Because the control sample had people that stayed married had some decline, and as well as the people that end up getting divorced. So there is decline, and you're going to get married, and then you're going to have a decline. Like that's sort of kind of not to be expected, but that it's not uncommon. And then on the for those that do get divorced, it's not a death sentence, right? You're not going to be miserable your entire life, but you can regain life satisfaction. It won't be exactly, at least in a mean level aspect. You can regain, obviously, life satisfaction. It won't be exactly how it was when you first got married or those first couple of years, but that you definitely can have life satisfaction later in life. It's not a death sentence for you. So you're not going to be miserable your entire life because you got divorced, but it will be a tough couple years post divorce.
Yes,
for sure.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. So we've been talking for a little bit, and I appreciate all your time. You've done some really good research and, put out some really good papers. What are the things that you're currently working on and the research you're doing and other papers, if you want to share, that you're continuing to do in this world of research?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I have so many things, so I have to think about how to limit this to so many things I want to focus on and want to do, and it's always a challenge in this phase. Like I'm now just starting as an assistant professor, and then the number of projects that you're working on are really increasing, and you really have to think, I have to finish some of them and not just start new ones, right? So that's just something I'm struggling with right now. I think, one thing is that I really want to focus on studying multiple life transitions at the same time. So I do that to some extent, maybe in this paper, because I also start at marriage. So you connect it to marriage at least. But I think the data sets out there, like the socioeconomic panel study, but you also have a Dutch panel study and a British one, so you have many more. They get much better each time. So they just you can follow people for many, many years right now. And it's so great that you can then also have the opportunity to connect these multiple life transitions, to see somebody, for example, that's on the path of first having a long-term relationship and then moving in together, getting married, getting children, and compare that person to somebody who completely deviates from that. and then look at changes across time. So just really ask even questions for a longer period of time, how people change and have different trajectories. So that's something I would like to do in the future. And currently I'm also working on other papers. For example, one might be interesting to mention is on intergenerational mobility. So that's one where people, so it's also with the socioeconomic panel study. And if people move up compared to their parents in education level, so that their parents have a low education level and they are the first generation student that go to university. And if they then show different changes compared to a control sample, again, the control sample here of people that remain at that lower level of education. So that's something where I also want to match them on early factors and follow them across early adulthood to see how they change across time. So that's, I think that's something I think for this paper is something I also write about in the discussion, that I just want to use the same methods for other life transitions and also have a clear starting point. For example, with Parenthood, you also have these anticipation effects. And that's also very interesting to look at, I think, just to see how people change before they become parents. I think if they, and you can also compare people that plan to become parents compared to people that don't, that haven't planned it. And I think that's just, there's a lot of possibilities there to improve the research that has already been done.
Yeah, no, that's all great. The intergenerational thing is super interesting. I would say yes, planned versus unplanned, pregnancies or children. It would be fascinating.
Yes, yeah.
I think also a trend that is more common now, especially for younger people, is what is, I don't know, this would be maybe difficult, but some kind of comparative analysis of, most people are waiting much longer to have their first child. I mean, we're talking early 30s, mid 30s, late 30s, sometimes, which is very different from how, people 50 years ago were having kids at 16, 17, 18. And not to say that doesn't happen now, but that the average, I think now is maybe at least in the United States is 27 or 28.
Yeah, it's higher even in the Netherlands, I think. But
it's very high. And that's obviously going to have some impact.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you have a fully mature brain. You've lived by yourself without having that, it's much different to, let's say, ostensibly leave your parents' house at 18, 19, and then you have a kid, a year or two later, as opposed to you own your house and you have your career established, and then you have, that's a very big difference in terms of young adulthood and what the trajectory is like. And then I would expect on kind of particular to what your research is on, well, how satisfied are they? Because then if it's, well, I have all of these things and I have economic good fortune and I've established myself, but I don't have a kid. I don't have that. What kind of life satisfaction would they have as opposed to folks that, are struggling at 20, but they have kids and they, might feel satisfied. There's just so many interesting things.
There's many interesting things there. Yeah. It's also, I might expect if people become parents at a younger age, they might show stronger changes. Because then it's a bigger shift from being maybe not completely mature yet and then having that responsibility. Yes. But if you are older, then you already have probably everything established. You have a house, you have a stable relationship for many years maybe even, and a stable income. And then I expect less psychological changes or changes in personality after, because people are already mature and that might be a big difference as well. So that's also interesting. And also what you're saying about well-being, how that relates. I also have a project on childlessness that I want to start. So that's just like in the first phase of planning it. And I'm also not really sure. I think it's also interesting in this time. It's also a collaboration with a sociologist, Katja Ivanova is her name, and she is also great with this. And it's just like also from a sociological perspective to think about these different generations, and that it's also more people that remain childless, that's something that increases across the years. And if it becomes more like normal, it might also have less bad consequences. That's kind of like a different reasoning of what you just said. So I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
Both might play a role, and would be very interesting to look into.
Especially, I think, in terms of identity, right? So you're talking about personality impact, but in terms also of identity as well, which is, what does it mean for the 40-year-old man that doesn't have a child?
Yes.
Okay. 1,000 years ago, that meant something very serious. Now it might not, but what does that look like? And then how in society do we have certain heuristics, or how do we have certain attributions about that in terms of identity? But then also, how do we look at that for women, right? Because, again, that's another form of identity. If you're not, if you don't have the experience of motherhood in society, totally fine. But as you have more and more people that are childless as women, what does that also implicate for society, and then for identity and all those other things? And so, again, it's very fascinating. All these, as society keeps changing, both in the West, Western Europe, the United States, Canada, and then elsewhere, having kids later, not having kids at all, etc. Those are things that, we never thought to question or consider or observe or analyze. And so now we're having more of those types of questions, which is, I think super interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
The short version is that you'll never not be busy. You'll always have something to look at.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I also love that you say identity. I mean, that's another thing that we talk now a lot about. I mean, the big five, also self-esteem, satisfaction, but there are so many other things that you can measure. And what I also see as part of your personality, I mean, it's something that's, I also have at my department some identity researchers that look into narrative identity that might also change the narrative that, you tell about yourself if you have a turning point in your life. And so just to look at these different layers of personality, not only these broad big five traits, but also your narrative identity, for example. I think that's, so if I will collect my own data in the future, if I ever get a grant, then I hope to really study it in the broadest way possible as well. And not only look at these broad big five traits, which are a good starting point, but not enough to describe how people change and what makes us who we are.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Well, I mean, you've been so generous with your time, and I've had so much fun talking with you about all of this stuff. It's great research, and I'm so thankful that you were so kind to give me your time and your brain power for a couple hours. Tell listeners where they can find you, and where they can read your papers and anything else that you want to share about where people can look you up.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. I don't even know my Twitter name by heart. I don't know. But if you look for my name, that must be very unique. And a lot of Manon Van Scheppingen's online. So so I am on Twitter. I also have an OSF page, which might be interesting for people. So all my preprints are online. So even though some journals you might have to pay to get access to my papers, you can find everything on my OSF page. So this is like the Open Science Framework page. So if you dare just type in my name, you will find my papers as well. I also post all my codes and supplemental materials, pre-registrations. We didn't even talk about open science, but I'm very much open science. So that might be the best resource I can give for people if they want to read more of my work. And I also really want to thank you. It's really great to do this. I was a bit nervous, I must say, because as you can hear, it's not my first language, English, so it's always a bit more challenging than doing something in Dutch. But I really appreciate to be able to talk about my research for such a long time. That's great. So thank you so much. I really enjoyed the interview. Yeah.
No, I appreciate it. No, I absolutely did as well. I'm a big believer in trying to find, or not find, but to kind of spotlight when there's good research. There's so much bad research, and there's so much, horrible things that people love to complain about. And that's fine. I complain too sometimes, but I think it takes a little bit more effort sometimes to override our, trait negativity bias and to say, okay,
Yes.
well, wait a minute. There's really good things that are out there, some really good research, and there's good things that are people are doing. And I like to really talk about that and explore that because, look how much time we spent talking about all this great stuff.
I never imagined that we would spend so much time actually.
That's so much more purposeful, I think, than just talking about all the horrible things. Yes, I really appreciate you coming on, and I would have you again anytime. There's always some really, really good stuff. So thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot. I appreciate all the effort you put in, and you're a great interviewer. So it's just nice to talk to you. Yeah.
Thank you.